come on up. She's got a little PowerPoint she's going to be using too. I'll go ahead and let her introduce her name and what her mission's all about. And I'm so grateful to have her this morning. Y'all give her a welcome, warm applause.
Good morning. I'm going to try not to cry because I'm humbled first. I'm really humbled that y'all would even give me your Sunday time to share my heart and what God has not only delivered me from, but gave me a purpose to help others that were in my situation. I am the founder of For Sarah. So For Sarah is a nonprofit organization that works with girls that have been trafficked or exploited or that work in the adult entertainment industry. You might not see it, is a 6-week awareness campaign that we just actually created to raise awareness about trafficking, because we all know that the World Cup is coming and it draws a huge crowd, but when the crowd leaves, trafficking still remains. So of course, I'm going to share my story a little bit through the presentation, but For Sarah was named after my daughter, Sarah, who is now 21. But in 2003, while I was working at the Pink Pony as a dancer, I was a dancer, God called me out of that lifestyle through my late husband, Jake, who grew up in the church, and I had met while I was working in the club. And I had told him I felt God was calling me out of to church, but I didn't grow up in church. And he was like, you can come to my church. So he invited me to a little church in Conyers, Georgia. And through that, we ended up having a daughter, Sarah. And I knew when I had my daughter, Sarah, that I did not want her to make the same choices that I made in life. I wanted her to have a chance in life. So I created For Sarah. Even though I was doing it for God's work, for the Lord's work, I was also doing it as a mother. So the next slide. So of course, what our focus is at For Sarah is we want to bring these stories to light. You think, oh, this is not going to happen in my church. This is not going to happen in my community. But when I first started For Sarah in Conyers, Georgia, I'll never forget sharing a group of, they weren't Rotarians, but they were just a small group, a meeting group, and I was telling about, hey, I want to help women that are in the sex industry, women that are prostituting, women that are stripping, women that are selling themselves. And they were like, oh, that's an Atlanta problem. It's not a Conyers problem. And that was 22 years ago. And now it's a worldwide problem. It's always been. Next slide. So, of course, we're going to talk about trafficking, but what is trafficking? It's when force, fraud, or coercion, it could be a young girl, it could be a teenager, it could be a 13-year-old young little girl that you think, oh, no, that 13-year-old girl would never be involved in human trafficking, but it does happen. Or it could be a 45-year-old lady who is just surviving and gets caught up with a pimp and is being trafficked and sold. Whenever there's force and fraud used to manipulate the situation, it creates the opportunity for a trafficker to step in and sell a young lady or boy for a profit. Next slide. So, of course, who are the victims? Anybody can be a victim. Anybody could be sold into trafficking. I, unfortunately, was molested as a little girl by our father. My sister, my brother, and I were all victims of childhood sexual abuse. And so many of the girls that we work with come from dysfunction, they come from heartache, and they come from pain and trauma that family sometimes inflicts on them. And sometimes when they do not get the healing that they need or a safe environment, when I talk about the church being a safe place, they get lured by the first person that gives them attention. And if they're 12 years old running away from home and they meet a man that is in his 40s or 30s and he says, you can come stay with me, that is the perfect opportunity for someone to come in and prey on them. Next slide. So we use the simplest way, instead of using a real live person, of course we want to see that, we use these images to create a doll. Like when I was a victim of child abuse and we had to tell the child Advocacy Center, what happened to me and to my sister, they use Barbie dolls, right? Because it was a simple way to explain what someone did to them. But when they're runaways or when they age out of foster care, sometimes they never get that opportunity to share what they've been through. And then that's when you see individuals that are being arrested for prostitution or becoming in the adult entertainment industry. They get lured into that and they get stuck in it. There's also boys. There's boys that are sold, that are trafficked, that are exploited as well. Because I know we talk about girls a lot, but for Sarah, our focus is girls. But we do come across boys. So of course, what does it look like today? Most people think that it's not happening, but it does. It happens. It happens across the world, and it happens in McDonough. It happens in Atlanta. It happens in Vegas. It happens in Mobile, Alabama, where I was born and raised. It happens everywhere. And what drives it? Social media and the strip clubs and truck stops and anything else that gives an opportunity for a victim to become prey. Next slide. They use grooming. So if you have a young girl that is struggling, like I ran away at the age of 14 from my grandmother's house because my grandmother was taking care of me. I grew up in, my mother owned bars, so I grew up around bars. I grew up around that atmosphere. I grew up basically taking care of myself. But my grandmother was a safe place for me. But as a teenager, I started acting out. I started hanging out with the wrong crowd, but the wrong crowd was my sister, who was 4 years older than me. So my sister, at the age of 15, gave me my first hit of ecstasy. And we talk about grooming, but sometimes it can be family, sometimes it can be other friends. And predators, they take opportunities where they see vulnerability, where they see the absent father, where they see the absent mother. Even, unfortunately in church settings as well, they take the opportunity to pick up where someone else is not able to meet the need. And that might be, oh, you need a new cell phone? I'll help you with the cell phone. Oh, you need your hair done? I'll pay for your hair done. You need clothes? I'll help you with clothes. And that is where a perfect opportunity where a 14-year-old girl who is not getting those things from home will take this as an opportunity to meet a man, and the next thing you know, she's moved in with him, and he's selling her online. Next slide. So, of course, we talk about online exploitation. How many of you have heard of Craigslist? How many of you have heard of Backpage? Backpage was the #1 site across the world where underage girls as young as 12 and 13 were being sold for sex. And Craigslist was it's a duplicate of Craigslist. So on Craigslist, you could sell your house, your car, your dog, a boat, and on Backpage, it was exactly the same format, but you could actually buy a little girl if you wanted to, or a boy, or an adult. But predators use online opportunities to solicit girls, to solicit buyers, to solicit people that can become their, I say prey, but it could be their sister wife, because we use the word sister wives because sometimes pimps and traffickers, they have multiple women working in their circle. Next slide. And sometimes if you have a young lady who is a recovering addict and she's addicted to drugs or alcohol, and she meets a man and he fills that void in her life, but he also gives her the drugs and the alcohol and everything for her to work for him. We've had several girls who came to us who were pregnant and that were being sold in Atlanta and hooked on heroin and living in a hotel, and then they would have guys that would come in there and visit with them. And unfortunately, It comes from all walks of life, from school principals to law enforcement, to pastors, to husbands, to couples. There's no one person that you can label as a trafficker because anybody can be or become one. The next one. A lot of times they're in survival. You're like, why are they doing this? Why are they in this lifestyle? Like, why? What got them to this point? And so many times they're just surviving. If you have a little girl that's been running away since she was 12 years old and now she's in her 30s, she has no high school diploma, she has no family support, she has no church family, she has nobody that calls and checks on her, but that pimp does, but that trafficker does, or that buyer does, or the sister wife. That's what keeps them stuck in it. I remember as a little girl, my mother, who was married to my father at the time, he was a gambler, but he was a rapist. He raped girls, and he raped my mother, but in her lifetime, domestic violence, it didn't really exist then, right? It was like something that she married him, so she had to handle it. But now times have changed, like domestic violence came in, and you're like, well, why doesn't the victim just run? Why don't they why don't they leave? Because they get stuck. They get stuck in the trauma. They get stuck, and they don't have an outlet or anybody there that will help them and protect them. Sometimes they don't even have transportation. They don't even have driver license to get away. Because where they ran from, they're stuck in the same position, the same background, but a different person. And especially if they're addicted to drugs and they don't have any mental health medication, if they're suffering, there's just so much suffering, y'all, that I see every day with the work that we do. And you feel like there's no hope, but then God reminds you that there is, that he's not done with their story. Next. So where does it happen? It happens, we talked about it, it happens everywhere. It happens all across the U.S. My husband and I moved to, I don't know if y'all know where Rutledge is, but we moved to Rutledge, Georgia in 2017. And I thought, okay, it's just a little bitty town. They're filming Scooby-Doo right now there. Like it's just a little town, and you think, finally, I can get some peace. I won't have to, I can isolate myself. And the first 2 months that we moved there, there was a little park down the road from us, and there was a sting where they recovered a 12-year-old little girl and a 15-year-old runaway out of Conyers. And they arrested the guy for trafficking. Thank you. And so it happens. You can't run from it. Next slide. We talked about why don't they leave. So there are girls that we've helped that are repeat. They leave one pimp and they think they're safe, and they meet another pimp. And then that pimp sometimes is worse than the previous pimp. We have girls that were selling themselves in hotels in Atlanta, and they ended up becoming recipients of lawsuits recently, where there's some attorneys that are actually holding these hotels accountable, because not only did they not train their staff, they did not train them. The staff ignored what was going on in their business. They ignored that there were underage girls there being sold in their hotel. They turned a blind eye and acted as if it didn't happen. They moved them, instead of in the front of the hotel, to the back of the hotel. And several of our ladies actually became recipients of these lawsuits. And there's other lawsuits that are happening across the world where they become like, they're actually sending a message to the hotel industry that we're not going to tolerate that. Like if there's crime, if there's runaways that are coming to your hotel, if there's pimps that are setting up shop in your hotel and you're allowing it to go on, you're just as guilty as the pimp themselves. Next slide. So how do we respond? So for Sarah, when I first started for Sarah, so in 2003, I was at a dark place in my life, one of the times. But in this dark place in my life, actually, my grandmother died in 2002, and I just felt stuck. I had been dancing. I worked at the Gold Club, and I worked at the Pink Pony, and I danced for a little over 6 years. But I was lost. I felt abandoned. I felt misunderstood. I felt stuck. I felt like nobody really cared. But one day, I had made money that night, and I made $2,500 that night working at the Pink Pony. And you think, oh, wow, I make $2,500, I'll be happy. Money does not buy happiness. But I cried all the way home that night, going to my townhome that I lived in Dunwoody, and I asked God for the first time to save me from myself. And I didn't know what was going to happen. I just knew what I was doing wasn't working. And so shortly after that is when I met my husband. I met him while I was working in the strip club. And it was like God sent him in there as a customer, and I always tell people, don't get any ideas. And he pursued me, and that's what God did. He pursued me in the darkness. And when my husband and I started dating, I told him I felt like God was calling me to church. And that's when he invited me to his church in Conyers. And through that is when the ministry was born. Well, unfortunately, in 2021, my husband was killed in a car accident. He was 50 years old. And here I was again asking God, like, I'm serving you. I know you have me in your will. Why would you take something so precious to me? And he told me, his job was over. The mansion, he is with Jesus where he actually wanted to be. But also 9 months later, my stepson, he was 23 years old, and they always say death comes in threes, and it did. And my stepson relapsed after being clean for 3 years, and he passed away from fentanyl overdose on August 31st, 2022. So it was a dark season in our lives for a couple years, and we feel like we're coming out of the cloud. But through that, God has kept his promises. And like Pastor said, he definitely, some things we don't understand why they happen, but I know what my calling was, and just being strong in God and my faith, and just staying the course no matter how hard it gets, because it gets hard. And they say just because you serve God doesn't mean that it's not going to get messy, because it does. But through that, the girls have witnessed me serving and staying faithful to what God has called me to do, which is helping girls get out of the industry. And so we have the assessment house, our safe house. We call it a safe house, but it's actually an assessment house where girls that are pregnant coming off the street, girls that are running from their pimp, or just they're just tired. They come to us and they stay with us up to sometimes 4 to 6 months, and they come temporarily, freshly off the street, sometimes addicted to drugs, sometimes not addicted to anything, just lost and tired. And I have got to witness, when I don't like blood and I don't like needles, but God will put you in the middle of the mess. And I have seen death. I have seen people pass, girls that we've helped, but I've also seen birth. I've got to be in the hospital room when they give birth to these babies. I've got to cut the umbilical cord. And it's been life-changing for me. We also have our strip club outreach, where that was where For Sarah was birthed. When I started going to church and I felt the calling on God, and my pastor, I told him, I said, I think God wants me to help strippers and prostitutes. He was like, that's a God idea. But not everybody understood that, because I didn't understand it. At the time, I was just trying to deal with my trauma and change my life. But God definitely took it and made something out of it. Prior to my husband passing away, they say, you don't have to have a degree to do the Lord's work. And so I felt inadequate. I just felt like, I was just a former dancer. She's just a dancer. She don't know what she's talking about. But God opened up a door in 2021 before my husband died, And he was so proud of me that I was invited to the White House with other ministries, private invitation only, and got to be on the stage with President Donald Trump in 2020. And I'll never forget, because my husband wasn't even allowed. We all went to Washington, D.C., but it was only invite only. And I'll never forget, I was nervous. I was like, he's like, you put your pants on the same way they do, and you've worked your tail off. You deserve to be there. But when I was there, I was able to, one of the ladies, she prayed, I'm going to pray that you get to at least shake President Trump's hand. And on national TV, I got to shake his hand. And that was something that was so special, because my husband was like, there is nothing else you need to do. But God took an ex-dancer and put her in the White House. And, that was just something that was special to me. But through that, I felt a conviction that, hey, I want to go back to school. So in 2021, before our daughter graduated high school, I made the decision to go get my bachelor's degree, because nobody in my family had a college degree, and I had a GED, and our daughter was a senior in high school. And I went back, and my daughter graduated at 16 got her high school diploma, and then I went and signed up and got my bachelor's. I graduated in 2024 with my bachelor's degree, but then I stayed, I made honor roll all through that. When my husband died and my stepson died, I stayed the course. I made straight A's all the way through it. And then I decided to go and get my master's degree. And this past Mother's Day, my daughter Sarah graduated from UGA with her bachelor's in business, and I graduated the very next day with my master's at Mercer University for business. So there is hope, and I know it's heavy, and you think, God, this work, it is heavy, but we have girls like just giving our scholarship program and letting them know that you can go back to school. Like, you don't have to be labeled a dancer or a prostitute or an escort or a victim anymore, that you can thrive, that you can become something great if you put Jesus in it, in your circle, and go after his purpose for your life. Because working in a hotel and working in the industry is not a purpose for anybody. Nobody deserves to be there. Next slide. So, of course, how can the communities miss it? I know, you think, this is not our problem. How many of you have children? How many have grandchildren? How many have great-grandchildren? It is everybody. It is our culture now. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and my grandfather was married to my grandmother, and he loved my grandmother very much. But even as a little girl, I shared a lot of how God took my crazy Alabama family and has used it for his glory. But my grandfather was a buyer of prostitutes. He would buy prostitutes. But he loved my grandmother very much. In 2004, he was murdered while he was on a date with a prostitute in Pritchard, Alabama. And just through that, my whole life, it was the secret in the family. Don't share it. Don't share it. But now you have the demand and the supply. And as long as there's a demand, there's going to be a supply. And so it is never going away. Even in the Bible, it talks about it. Having a clean heart and clean hands is very important, but our world is going, it's a struggle. And I remember my grandmother telling me, I hope, she goes, it's bad now, but it's going to be really bad when you get my age. And I remember my grandma, I love my grandmother. She didn't take me to church, but she always had the Bible of Jesus on her coffee table. She tried. She was a good woman, but she didn't take me to church. But I try to make sure the kids in our program, they go to church. We try to make sure the women in our program go to church. Next one. Next. So what can y'all do? Besides showing up, right? That's the most important part, showing up. Paying attention, understanding that little girl that might be giving you problems now, ask questions. Ask her, is something going on? the girl that keeps running away, the boy that's on drugs. Love them. Love them. Because I'll never forget the feeling when I first went to a church. And this kind of reminds me of the church I went to. When I went to Faith Tabernacle in Conyers, Georgia, June of 2003, actually, yeah, June. They didn't say, they didn't know that I was still dancing, that I was still working in the club. My husband knew, and his family knew. But all they knew was I wanted to come to church. I didn't even have a Bible. And I was going to the club and going to church. I would work and go to church on Sunday with my mother-in-law, and she would make sure I had a very nice outfit on. But they welcomed me. They greeted me. So the little fellowship that you did, think, oh, it's something that you might not want to do. You're like, oh, I'm tired. But I'll never forget a lady, the very first time I went to church, that's what they did. They made us meet and greet people, and she shook my hand, and she was like, thank you for being here. And I just remember her pretty smile, and that is something that I remember. But I kept going to church, and nobody told me what I was doing was wrong. It was the Holy Spirit that convicted me what I was doing was wrong. And I'll never forget, July 27, 2003, I was driving, going to the Pink Pony to work. And I got in that club, and that night, it was empty. And if you ever, I'm sure, I hope none of y'all have been in a strip club before, but if you have, you might know that it's smoky, and usually it's dark, and it's usually a lot, it's crowded. Well, that night it was, no smoke was in the air. It was a clear night, and it was like God just opened up the heavens and told me it was time to leave. And I went back to the dressing room, and I told the house mom that was working there, I said, if y'all don't know what a house mom is basically someone that handles the girls in the club, make sure they don't leave and drink. But I told her, I said, I'm leaving, and she goes, it's because of that guy, isn't it? And I'm like, no, it's because of Jesus. And I was on my way out. And a girl stopped me, and she said, we're never going to see you again, are we? And I said, I hope not. But God had other plans, and he used what I've been through to go into the strip clubs and to reach girls and to inspire others. And he's not done yet. We still got a lot of work to do. But I know one thing is for sure, he used the church to help me, to help others. So it is important showing up every Sunday. It is important loving on the people that are in your congregation. It is important to love that sinner, not love the sin, but love the sinner. But their behavior sometimes is because of what they've been through. Because I was just running. I was running from trauma, and so many of the girls that we work with, they were running. They're running. They have nowhere safe to go. And sometimes when they walk into the church, they feel like it's being judged, but sometimes it's conviction, and they don't know how to receive it. Next. But of course, it starts with us, right? It starts with the church. It starts with our community. It starts with people willing to share, because we're all not perfect. I'm sure we all have got some dark things that we don't want people to know about, but that doesn't mean that we can't help someone else that's going through it and not have to tell them everything. I know I've shared a lot today, but it's healing for me. And for me to be able to share what I've been through, and if it can help one person, I'm going to continue to do that. Next slide. And we talked about healing is possible. Next. And of course, my call to action for you. I know y'all have blessed us over the years with random things, like for our outreaches. When we go into the strip clubs, yes, God has opened the doors to let us go into strip clubs. And we don't take men, we take women. But being able to go in there and to see, I'm about to be 48, and to see a 20-year-old girl in there, or an 18-year-old girl, and it's her first night, and you want to just kidnap them and take them away, but you can't. You have to love them. You have to show them and be an example for them. And just being able to make that contact with the victim and let her know, hey, I was once in your shoes, and now God has called me to do this, and that even though you might be here, don't stay stuck here. that there's something better for you if you just give, Jesus a chance. Because that was one thing that I will never forget. I tried the drugs, I tried the alcohol, I tried the men. Like, when I made that step to walk away, I was like, why not try God? Next. And of course, I'm going to close. We talk about For Sarah and the assessment house. We have our outreach team. So if you felt called that you wanted to serve and come on outreach with us, you can do that. If you don't want to serve on outreach and you never want to ever go to the streets of Atlanta, you don't feel safe, you don't have to. But if you want to pray for us, we need it. I need lots of prayers. And then also we have our outreaches, where our outreach bags, gift bags, where you can put stuff in the gift bags. And it can be journals, it can be just makeup, beauty supplies, just something to make them feel special. And then if you feel a calling to serve women with children, our assessment house takes women with children. It's a small little house in Conyers, and they come there, and sometimes they don't have anything. Sometimes they're about to give birth, and we get to do a baby shower for them. Sometimes they have a couple kids, but we can only handle 1 or 2 kids at a time in their custody. They don't have clothes. They don't have anything. They don't have shoes for the kids. So things like that are important, are a great way for you to give back. And then also our Thrive program. So I talked about going back to school and girls getting scholarship opportunities through our Thrive program. It's to basically teach them it's a mindset, but help them not to feel like they're a victim, but to truly get out of that victim mindset and to believe in themselves, and also to get plugged into a church. So if there's anything that you feel that you could relate to in what I shared today, I would love for you to get involved. And if not, if I never see you again, I just want you to know that, never give up on that one person that maybe you think, oh, she's a lost cause or he's a lost cause, because you never know what God's doing behind the scenes. But thank you for letting me share, and I have some information if y'all want it, but I appreciate it, and it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
I'm sure you're willing to take cash and money, right?
Yeah. Yeah, as long as it's not counterfeit.
And can you go ahead and give information on how to contact? Because like I said, it'll be going on radio.
So For Sarah is the number 4, and then Sarah with an H, not without the H. .net. You can go on there. You can sign up to volunteer. You can refer a girl to us. If you just want to talk to me, you can still reach out to us. But that is the best way to connect. Thank y'all.
Y'all give them a round of applause again. I don't want to belabor the point and all that she made, because I think she did it real well. But I did want to say some things that people don't know about me, and the reason that this is very dear to my heart. I want you to notice the first thing that come to my mind is she said her husband, who was a church boy, come to the strip club. See, we don't know who's doing that. We don't know that. And I'm going to give you an example later on. It's the very reason of what she talked about today is the reason I wrote a book that I first opened up to everybody. It was Confessions of a Preacher, because at one time in my life I was addicted to pornography. But yet I was a preacher. Matter of fact, I was a pastor, and I was addicted to pornography. So I wrote a book, and I began to tell all the ways that all this happened. The way it happened for me is I was in the Air Force, and a staff sergeant tried to molest me. Well, me being a boy and being a man in the Air Force, I wanted to prove I was a man. So when I left the Air Force, I had a hatred spirit like you would never believe. I would go around trying to pick fights, and it didn't matter who it was, male, female, whatever. I was angry. And it caused a lot of problems in my life, and so I wanted to make sure I wrote that book. And in my studies, I found out that over 50% at the time, way back then, over 50% of the clergy was addicted to pornography. No wonder the door shut on me when I would go around trying to proselyte my book. And so now I only give that book to mature Christians that are struggling, because the average Christian cannot understand that you can get into a lifestyle like that and still love God. Still go to church, still worship. But there's a gnawing on the inside of you that lets you know that you're really born again, because there's something inside of you saying, this ain't right, you need to get this straight, I want to love you. And that's one thing that I'm very proud about our church. Matter of fact, if you'll study history, the early church history, you'll find out that in Rome, the prostitute places were actually so prevalent during that time that visitors didn't have to wonder where they were. They were footprint marks printed on the roads that led to the brothels. That's how bad it was. But when a Christian would go out and they would witness to these different girls and stuff, that was their only livelihood. And a lot of people said, well, just get out. It's not that easy. A lot of times, like you said, if you don't have a driver's license, you don't have this, that, and the other, no one's going to hire you. You don't have work experience. So they say, get out. Well, the early church, what they would do is they'd take them in. They say, you quit your job, we'll take care of you, we'll train you, we'll give you a job. So the church is mainly here to be able to help in that area. And that's one thing that I can tell you about our church that I love so much. We take anybody in. Now, you're not going to have a position up here if you're living in a lifestyle like that. But we're going to love you no matter who you are. And a matter of fact, if you don't have clothes that's covering your leg good enough, we got a nice little cloth that we'll put over your legs, and we'll do it discreetly and we'll do it lovingly so that you can kind of understand. Might need to change clothes a little bit before you come next time. But I gave that incident one time of how that girl said she never wanted to come back to church again because of the fact they had the pantsuit rule back in the day. We don't want to be judgmental. And out of that, I also started a ministry. Unfortunately, the preacher that I was under that time wanted to get his hands in everything. He seen money, and I wasn't going to allow it to be that. But we started what they called the LOVE ministry, and it's layman offering valuable encouragement. And we did exactly what she's talked about. You say, well, I've been in some bad places in my life. God can't use me. Yes, he can. A matter of fact, anyone ever heard of a preacher called Bob Harrington? He was an alcohol preacher. Actually, he was an alcoholic that lived in Louisiana. And God saved his soul, and he would go into those bars, and he would preach the gospel. And one day, he was sitting there down in Decatur. Of course, back in that day, it was Decatur, Glen Haven Baptist Church. And Mr. Bob Harrington was preaching. And a 7-year-old boy was in the balcony. And that 7-year-old boy heard Christ say, you need me. And I was that 7-year-old boy. And I made my way to an altar and got saved. Don't tell me because you're an alcoholic, because of this, because of that, you can't work for God. That is normally your ministry. Now, that being said, if you're still struggling in that industry, don't go and do it. You wait until God has you strong enough. But one of the things, and I'm hoping that we just now took on a few more missionaries, but I'm hoping one day we can take her on. I think that's a good thing to be able to do. Listen, I'll tell you something. She said she lived in Dunwoody. It was about 10 years ago that the Atlanta news media found out inside the woods in Dunwoody, in the nice high-dollar subdivision area, they were young girls as far as 11 and 12 years old, living in boxes that were in the woods in them subdivision, and the men knew they were there, and they was going and purchasing them. It's under our nose. And this is what the church has been called to do. So I hope that really ministered to you. I'm glad she came. I was glad that you was able to get here on the day. But one of the things, until we can hopefully one day take you on, I'm going to tell you this, and I believe I can say it through the authority of God's word and by experience. If any of them girls are in the McDonough area and they're looking for a church, tell them the Old Country Church will love them. Tell them the Old Country Church will preach truth, but we'll do it in love, and we won't judge them. And let's make sure that we stomp the devil good in the face and say, not here, not here. So let's go ahead.